Hi there, welcome to Stoked to be here. My name's Laura and I'm the back half of Stellar Tandem, a record-breaking attempt to cycle around the world in 2022. And is in part of the lead up to this trip, we're talking to people from the worlds of endurance and cycling. And somebody that's definitely from both of these worlds is Rob Gardiner, who is a ultra-distance cyclist, the holder, well, briefly the holder of the Europe record.
Very briefly.
But he kind of makes up a hat trick, having spoken to Lee Timmis and Ian Walker already, but has many other adventures under his belt. So we'll get on to hearing a bit more of those. Good evening, Rob.
Good evening. Thanks for having me here. It's good to chat.
No problem at all. So the kind of obvious first question is, how did it all start? Were you an avid cyclist growing up? Were you super sporty at school, or was it something you kind of stumbled into, as a lot of people seem to do?
There's two answers to that. I was asked that recently, and it ties in. One of the answers ties in definitely to what you're doing. So I grew up on the back of a tandem, and I think you can tie it back to that. You know, if you grow up on the back of a tandem, you do tend to spend quite a bit of time cycling after that. But it was always just a sort of a means to an end for me. I was never thinking about anything other than where I was trying to go on the bike, and not in the sense of breaking records. I literally mean just getting around. But it did change. I was given a book when I was, how old was I? Probably about 22, something like that, for Christmas, and it's got nothing to do with cycling, but it triggered something that then led to a whole series of events. And the book's called In Xanadu by William Dalrymple, which I don't know if you've ever read, but it's basically the tale of him having left university, so similar time of life of where I was at that point, and he set off to follow the old Silk Road, and this was in the late 80s as the world was changing quite significantly. And he was looking for Xanadu, which was Kublai Khan's kind of ancient capital of his kingdom. And he basically retraces the Silk Road through all of Middle East, Central Asia, and ends up in Chengdu in China, kind of behind the Iron Curtain at this point. And it's a fabulous read, but it really just inspired me to go and explore those areas. But he did it all in public transport, and I've never really been that keen on just sitting on trains and buses the whole time. I'm a bit too active for that. And walking, I do like walking, but it takes a while to walk from, the UK to China. Yeah. So, cycling was naturally just the most obvious choice. And I started kind of researching and planning it. And at the time I was working overseas in South Korea, teaching English. So I saved up some money and recruited a couple of friends and set off about a year later, and ended up cycling from the UK. I actually got to India. I flew a little bit between Kazakhstan and India, but ended up cycling, I think it's about 11,000 kilometers, 7 months of travel. And it just kind of went from there. I did another tour after that, and then another one, and then thought I was kind of done and got a job. And then no, I wasn't. And I got into sort of more ultra and bike packing, and it hasn't stopped. That was a decade ago now. So it's just going.
Yeah, there's definitely an addictive element to it, isn't there? So who are you on the tandem with? Was that your parents or older siblings?
So I'm the older brother of two. So initially it was just when I was very young. It was just me on the back of a tandem, and then my brother in a child seat on the back of, I think it was mum's bike. And then eventually when he got a bit older, for a few years there were two tandems with a brother on the back of each.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. I don't think we were very good. You're talking about stokers. I remember distinctly going uphill and pedaling backwards and winding my dad up. I don't think you should do that on your world record.
No, I think Steve would have me off the back pretty quickly if I tried that. Yeah. But yeah, what a fab place to start though. And I think just sat on the back of a bike probably builds confidence and kind of awareness, and just having your bum on the seat all adds up, doesn't it? So yeah, it sounds like a fab start out. And then you say that you were working career and things like that before. So were you already quite well travelled before you set out? Was that something that was quite familiar to you?
Yeah, I think so. Travel was probably part of my life before cycling was, and then they sort of merged, and now cycling's just as big a part. But I mean, I work and travel alongside my other stuff. So before I headed to South Korea, I'd already traveled a fair bit. And actually, when I left university, my only kind of rule I had when I was looking for a job was I want to go work somewhere overseas. And bizarrely, I narrowed it down to I think I got 2 interviews. One was teaching English in South Korea, which is obviously a very developed country. It's basically like kind of an Asian version of America. It's really westernized. Great, but it's quite familiar in that sense. And then the other one was teaching in a school in Somaliland on the Horn of Africa. And those were the 2 options. And I fortunately didn't get the Somaliland job because I think I would have been way out of my depth. That would have been quite an intense experience.
Yeah, I bet that would have been quite a culture shock in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So planning your trip along the Silk Road, I mean, it's increasingly traveled nowadays on bicycle, but there's still not a huge amount of kind of information out there. How did you find information at that time? Could you find any information about cycling through those sort of areas, or was it few and far between?
Yeah, it definitely has changed. It doesn't feel that long ago, but when I talk to people now who are planning it, the resources they have are definitely better than what I had this was 2013 we did it. And at that point I was still navigating off paper maps for like quite a large chunk of it. And the only resources online were quite patchy blogs. So you'd find like one really good article that had like a really detailed description of one stretch of road, and then it would just end, and they would just either, they didn't want to talk about the road from then on. So I don't know, is it any good? So it was quite difficult to piece it together. And I remember sitting in internet cafes just trying to work out where like the chaikhanas, the tea rooms were in the Kazakh desert, and referencing the old Soviet maps and the names that were in the blogs, and putting down, right, well, there's a tea room there. And I found it the other day, actually. If you ever go on Google, they have this feature called My Maps, which they still have, but no one uses it anymore. And I went and built a map of dropping pins at every single tea room and every single kind of well I'd found. And it was actually it's quite fun. It's part of the experience, planning these kind of things. And that's still there. I just think there's a lot more information now.
Yeah, I might even have a dig around for that, because there is quite a bit in various sites and blogs and things, but it's still kind of an area of the world that and we're still in the kind of thick of route planning at the moment. So there's a lot more to be done in that respect. And how did you find kind of the technicalities of getting visas, border crossings, things like that? Because you've obviously done quite a bit of this now. Have you got any tips or tricks of the kind of crossing into different countries?
Just be patient, basically. I mean, the amount of visas I've had to get, and then the ones you only really remember the ones you've been rejected for. So I had a couple of bad experiences. One time I wasn't cycling. This was a few years before I tried to go into Turkmenistan, and I got given duff advice by the embassy. They said, well, if you go with this letter of invitation, if you go to this border crossing, you'll definitely be able to collect the visa. And it turned out you couldn't. So I got across, I crossed no man's land from Iran. And it was Friday. So Friday prayers, they just shut up shop on the Iranian side. So I was stuck on the Turkmen side with them adamantly saying there's no visa. And I was backpacking at this point, and I remember they literally turned out my entire backpack with all my belongings to search it. And then they said, right, well, you're going to have to sleep here until Iran lets you back in, which fortunately they did. But I was slept under the watch of probably, I think it was maybe 18-year-old Turkmen soldier, showing me images of their like supreme leader on his mobile phone and playing Turkmen music. That was 12 hours. That, you remember not getting that visa.
Yeah.
That was just a bizarre experience. And there's been others. Like the reason why I couldn't cycle to China in the end on my first trip, I did get there, but I got to actually it was Kyrgyzstan, I think it was, where I was applying from. And I arrived the week they decided to stop issuing visas to non-nationals in Kyrgyzstan. And I found out from another cyclist. So I don't know if you sort of found this when you travel, but there are certain hostels that just basically fill with cyclists in Central Asia, because they're, when you meet people on the road, they say, oh, you should stay at this hostel. It's good value. There's other cyclists there. So consequently, every single one of these hostels is full of cyclists. So I got there and I was sort of prepping for my Chinese visa, and I hadn't shaved in probably 5 months. So I bought like a really cheap Bic razor, and I couldn't even find any shaving foam. So I sort of shaved myself with like some soap and the cheapest Bic razor. It was horrible. And then just as I came out of like the bathroom, bloody, this cyclist came back into the hospital and was like, "You're not going to get a visa. They've just stopped." So it was, that experience of being so close, jumping through all these bizarre hoops, because you have to. I should have explained. You have to shave for your Chinese visa photo, which if anyone's ever got it in Central Asia, you'll know that, but you wouldn't know if you hadn't done it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, that's interesting. Actually, luckily, we're not planning to go through China because Stevie, my front half, has a humongous beard, and I
don't know if that might not be a rule anymore, but yeah, back in the day, certainly when I did it, everyone was clean shaven.
Yeah, it all changes all the time, doesn't it? So
yeah,
we've got a lot of work to do trying to keep up to date with that sort of thing. And then as well, aside from that trip, you seem to have been all over on various other trips as well. Is there anywhere you haven't been that you want to go to, and how have you chosen where to go? I mean, there's obviously a whole world out there, but yeah, it's you seem to have seen quite a lot of it from what I can see.
I've never been to South America, and that's the big kind of blank space for me. I think, I've never cycled in Australia and New Zealand. I went as a kid, but because I've been, it's just, it doesn't quite have the same allure, but South America, definitely, I really want to go at some point. And I got quite close when I was cycling down through North America. I originally intended to just keep going. But it sort of ran out of the headspace and the time and also money. So, the reality kicks in eventually. But I think in terms of where you choose it, so much of it's just spontaneous. When you're doing long tours, and it's been a while since I've done a long tour, but so much of it's dictated by you kind of the natural route. Like when I often talk to people, because I work in African travel, so I'm often talking to cyclists who want to go and cycle in Africa, and more often than not, they want to cycle the length of Africa. And I'm like, well, there's only two routes. There's literally only two routes, because there's, this border's closed, this country won't allow you into this country. And once you plot it, there are pretty much two fixed routes you can do. And there's so many things like that where you realize that even though the world seems so open and developed, when you look at the infrastructure and the legalities and the practicalities and the seasons, there's actually not that many long routes you can do. And I'm sure you've come across this planning your record. You'll probably choosing between two routes, really.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, two routes, one with a couple of variations, but there's not a lot.
So I think for longer tours, it does come back to that. In the end, it's just practicalities, and then spontaneous decisions. Like when I was in America, and I realized I wasn't going to make it to South America. I was like, I kind of really want something a bit more exotic than Florida, because it's nice and it's comfortable, but it's Florida. It's not. This is not really what travel is. So I caught a plane to Cuba and spent 3 weeks cycling around Cuba, and that was brilliant. But I had never thought about it until I found myself in this sort of position where I was like, I want to go somewhere a bit more exotic. So I think you just sometimes have to just be spontaneous about it.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And also the other end of the spectrum, it was your Europe record, where you on a very strict time scale with a very strict route. How did that come about? It seemed like quite a almost sudden jump from all the touring and adventures to, right, I'm going to go and break a world record. Oh
yeah, definitely. If I did it again, or if anyone asked me for advice, I would not recommend doing it the way I necessarily did it. It's sort of, do I say, no, I did. Because it was quite a sudden transition, but it was a weird realization that I had started doing a lot more stuff that was verging on ultra endurance, and then eventually found myself doing what you'd probably consider ultra endurance. And it was because I had a job and I could only do 2 weeks at a time off, and you just end up pushing yourself. And then when you push yourself, either you hate it or you love it. And I loved it. I really enjoyed the physical side of it for the first time ever. Because you asked earlier, was I sporty at school? No, not at all. Like, I was active and I was outdoorsy, but I wasn't sporty. I never had the idea of training or pushing your body in a kind of repetitive manner. It just never occurred to me. So when I found it with cycling, I actually really enjoyed it. So I started getting into the ultra endurance side, and then also simultaneously around this time, this was back in, it was about 2017, 2018, there were a lot of people breaking the cross-continental records. So Mark Beaumont broke the Africa one, and then the round the world one, and then, you know, Sean and Lee broke the cross Europe one. And there was someone else, I'm sure there's another one. I think Jonas did the Eurasia one as well, Jonas Steigman. And he also did the cross Europe one before Andy then went and did the length of the Americas. So there's all these things going on. And I started to look at the numbers, and I don't know if you've had this, but you see the numbers and you think, you know, I was cycling 200k a day on my holiday the other day when I cycled down to, we did a big ride with a friend from the English Channel to the Black Sea, and that was nearly 200k a day, horribly ill prepared. And I look at, you know, Sean's record that he did, and I think he averaged about 260k a day. Now, you know, half of that is in Russia on Russian highways, and that is hellish, but that's not crazy when you think, well, that's only 2.5-3 hours more cycling a day, and I was staying in hotels. I was getting enough sleep when I was doing that. Of course, it's a lot harder than that. You know, every extra 10-20k a day, it takes exponentially more out of you, and you start to get into the realms of sleep deprivation and not getting recovery meals in and recovery time, and it does get way harder. But you know, if you do any other sports, you don't go and do park run and suddenly think, oh, I'm close to world record pace on my 5k. That doesn't happen. So it's only in ultra endurance cycling, certainly at that time, where I thought the distances or the speeds were kind of achievable for people who put their mind to it. And yeah, as it turned out, it was achievable. It wasn't going to stand up for very long, but it was achievable.
Yeah, no, actually, you're quite right. We that's how we got sucked in, was we saw the two ladies that hold the tandem record currently come in. They came in just before lockdown, and we saw their amazing effort, and we looked at it and went, we've done holidays, you know, faster than that pace. And that's how the whole thing's now spiraled out of all proportion. And admittedly, we won't be doing quite so many miles a day, but for a little bit longer. So it's the sustainability that's I think going to be the key thing, I think. And then because I know, like, for example, well, both Lee Timmis and Ian Walker are massively structured in their approach. Do you have a very set route? Did you have, you know, spreadsheets and plans? Do you have a lot of support, or was it more of a more just kind of relaxed approach to the planning?
I was structured, definitely. I think my lack of experience meant that I probably didn't apply that structure as well as I would have liked and have since. You know, even when I approach a race now, you know, talking about some of them are only 2 or 3 days, and I'll definitely structure that, and I'll do recce's and route plan. I've done like full spreadsheets for those before, and I wish I had done more of that for the record. I did, you know, I spent ages planning the route. I spent time like researching it. I spent time trying to learn it. I find the best way is to learn the kind of the course of a route, and then when you get to certain points, you think, oh, okay, I remember the next bit. And when you're tired, that does become difficult. But there were stretches where I wish I'd done more research, particularly through Russia. Had a bit more time researching which roads were sketchy, and also, well, I mean, the main mistake I made was I think I did it the wrong way around, really.
You were going uphill, right?
I've had someone say that to me, and
yeah, I bet.
I laughed, and then I realized they weren't joking.
Oh no!
And then I had to explain. But yeah, fortunately, that's only happened once. No, I based it on the fact that prevailing winds in Europe are southwesterly across the continent generally, and I kind of didn't want to finish with the hilliest stuff as well. I thought, well, while you're fresher. I mean, the logic now does seem a bit silly, because after the first day, you're not fresh at all. So it doesn't really matter. But the first half of the route I planned had about twice as much climbing as the second half. But as it turned out, the prevailing wind maybe helped on 2 days. I had a couple of good tailwinds. The heat and the hills, I don't think it would have mattered being the other way around. I think the fact that it's easier cycling in Western Europe than Eastern Europe, and faster tarmac probably would have counteracted that. But the main real pain that I wish I'd probably done it the other way was that I had a headwind for the last maybe 1,000, 1,500 kilometers. And by the last 500 kilometers, it was just hideously strong. And I had got my research wrong there. So I'd looked up prevailing winds in Norway and Finland and Nordkapp particularly, because I'd heard it was so windy, and I'd seen that there was a prevailing southerly. And it wasn't until a few days before I started, I decided to look up some wind. Familiar with wind flowers? It's where it shows the prevailing wind at different, like it's over a time period, basically, where it comes from. And I looked up some of these, and I think it's June, July, August, it goes from being a prevailing southerly to a prevailing northerly.
Oh, really? Oh.
For all of that region.
Yeah.
So but if there's one aspect I wish I'd researched a little bit earlier, because at least then I would have made an informed decision. I might have made the same decision, but you always want to make that decision with the right information. And I had overlooked that, which was a shame.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's pretty exposed up there too. So yeah, it sounds like
and this is when you're already struggling. It's 18 days in when I started. It was probably actually before that I started hitting the headwind, but you're completely broken. You've done Russia. It's cold. You're in the Arctic Circle. You don't know what sleep is. Not for two reasons. You're not sleeping anymore, and also there's no darkness anymore. So it's just very disorienting to be battering into a headwind for 24 hours a day. It's not much fun.
Yes, so that was obviously a tremendous effort regardless, and an epic record to have, even though I know it was broken fairly shortly after. But you also unofficially as well held the 7-day record. Is that something, was that in the lead up to the Europe record? Am I correct in that?
That was pretty spontaneous actually. I'd been doing lots of structured training, and I just felt like I needed to replicate the record experience a little bit, and the sort of the day after day toll, having targets, and just the routine, because a lot of the record stuff is just routine. So I was aware of that record, and for people who don't know, so it's the most number of countries you do in 7 days to cycle through, and it's quite a fun record. I think it was more fun because it was so spontaneous. I couldn't get the official record because I couldn't have applied to Guinness in time. So I didn't have to worry about any of the paperwork. I didn't have to worry about verifying it. I just had to worry about doing it. And the route planning is cool because you're trying to get as fewer kilometers and as fewer hills into as many countries as possible. So you end up doing like really weird detours, like climbing up to the Albanian border, crossing in, the border guards looking at you strangely the first time because you're like a lone guy on a bike. And then when you go out 5 minutes later, they're looking really strangely. But great cycling, like border regions are actually really interesting because you get these kind of blurring of countries, and you start to realize, it's horribly cliche, but borders are entirely artificial. But then there are also, there's physical elements to them. So you cycle down like the river valleys, and you see where that's the natural border. So it was really interesting from that perspective, and it taught me a lot about what I needed to do. And it was kind of crazy. I'd done all the training, and I felt the fittest I'd ever been, but I hadn't done big rides because I'd been training mainly through the winter, and I set off to do this over Easter. So I'd done some 200k rides, but I knew I'd need to do over 300, ideally sort of 320k a day for the record. And that was also what I needed to do for the 7-day one. So the first day I did 330k. That was my longest ever ride. And then every day after that, I did over 300k. So it was just, the step up, and then the confidence you take from that is just phenomenal. By the end of it, I felt physically broken, and I felt like I had a lot of learning still to do, but just the confidence was phenomenal. I felt amazing for it. So if anyone's ever looking at doing like a really big challenge, certainly several weeks, go and do a little one and do the same kind of intensity for a shorter time. And it's just, it's a really great way to actually train. I think all the kind of coaches would say, well, no, you're overloading your body, that's way too much. But you've got to bring into play the psychological element and the confidence you're going to have, and the kind of the lessons you'll learn as well.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting actually, because I've got some time booked off before we go away for us to go on a recce trip, partly to try and do the distance a day, but partly just to simply do stuff like try out all the kit. And as much as we've obviously done similar things before, I think almost to simulate the amount of miles we'll be doing a day, and hopefully we'll be going abroad for that. So as well, to experiment with, as again, we've cycled abroad before, but doing it at that pace in a different country and just trying to recreate that. And it's interesting you say that about coaches as well, because if you're training for a marathon, they always say, oh, you don't run marathon anywhere near marathon distance. But I think it's a bit different on a trip like this, because it's more about the sustainability than the actual distance, I think, the day to day. So
definitely,
it's good to hear that, definitely. And then you obviously got the bug for it and moved into kind of ultra racing, and have done quite a few epics there as far as I can see. What have been your kind of highlight rides, as it were? What have been your top events you've participated in?
Well, I haven't actually done that many. But I think that's the thing, is that you don't ever do that many, because they're so like completely draining and all consuming that a couple of years is enough for most people. But I think that the best experience I've had so far is probably race around Rwanda was probably the highlight for me. And it was my best finish, but it wasn't really because of that. It was just the experience was, it's a phenomenal country to go and cycle around, and the landscapes are incredible, and just it threw everything at me, and I actually enjoyed it, which, there's something different about sort of facing a tropical thunderstorm in Rwanda and battling your way through the mud. Like, that's enjoyable adversity, versus I tried to do Hell of the Northwest this year and pretty much got hypothermia. So that's not enjoyable adversity. I can tell you that's horrible. So I think, there's getting into the right headspace and having races that challenge you, but you also still manage to enjoy them is really part of it.
Yeah, no, definitely. And then do you ever see yourself kind of going back to the touring aspect again? Because one thing we get said to us a lot is, why you go so fast? Why don't you go slower and meet people and see places? And there's obviously a bit of a balance between touring and racing, and sometimes it feels like there's very little middle ground. Do you think there's still benefits to both, or is the touring saved for maybe a retirement, a leisurely amble around the world one day?
Yeah, there is. I think it's hard. It is hard once you've ingrained the kind of racing side into it to then go back and totally detach. But I find that if I do it with other people, I can still go back into kind of touring mentality. So I did a tour with a friend last year, just through Wales and the borders there, and it was really relaxed, slow pace, and I actually still enjoyed it. And I did a charity ride, which I helped kind of plan the route for, which was Land's End John O'Groats, and it was mainly non-cyclists, and I joined them for a bit of that, and I still really enjoyed it. So I think as long as there's other people there, and I kind of go on their pace, then that I don't mind doing that. And a lot of people think, oh, you must hate cycling at other people's speed. It's like, no, I actually really enjoy cycling at their speed. I know if I go on my own, it's very hard, because I've got no one to pace me to go slower and enjoy it, because you're so used to racing now.
Yeah, no, definitely. And kind of another interesting tip that I pulled up from your website was the 100 Climbs Club, which is Simon Warren has the infamous 100 Climbs book that it looks like you've been picking off over the past couple of years, where travel has been less restricted. You've looked like you've done a few of those now. Has there been anywhere that's, because they're all UK based, has there been anywhere that's kind of surprised you in the UK? Because we often find on Audax rides and things like that, you end up in a nook and cranny that you'd have never gone to otherwise on UK soil. And I just wondered if there'd been any highlights from that.
I think probably the bit that surprised me the most, I think I was about 25 now. I haven't actually written up the blogs for all 25 because I got a little bit distracted by other stuff, but I've done about 25. I think the ones, I've mainly done the Welsh ones now. So I've done some in the lakes, I've done some Pennines ones, I've done most of the Welsh ones, and I've done some in the southwest. But the ones that probably surprised me most were it was the fact that you could have such diversity of climbs and big climbs in a small area of southern Wales that I already thought I knew pretty well, because it's not that far from my house. I live in the Cotswolds in Cirencester. So southern Wales is kind of on my doorstep. So I thought I knew that area pretty well. And then I went and tried to actually plan routes to link up those climbs. And they all go in different directions. And it's actually really difficult to link them all together. But if you do it, you see just incredible landscapes. Like within, a couple of hours of riding of one another. You've got these amazing big climbs. So I just want to go back there once the weather gets better. I just want to go back and just keep riding there, because I'm here. I get like a 50-meter climb, and there I can go and do 200-meter climb, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, well, Wales has plenty of very good hills, which is great with fresh legs in the middle of an Audax. Sometimes it's a bit more testing, but the scenery is just fantastic.
Yeah, that is true. Certainly the gradients are very unforgiving.
Yeah, there's lots of surprises, but no, it's all good. It's good fun. And then you mentioned your website and your blogs. You've also got some pretty good recordings as well, like vlogs, as it were, from your Europe record and other bits and bobs too. I just wondered how are you going about recording that sort of thing on the bike? Is it just on a phone? Is it an action camera? It looked at one point you kind of got headphones, and I don't know if you're using a mic, but it's come out really good quality, and it's obviously something we're quite interested in, because we're quite determined to kind of get some footage along the way and try and involve as many people as possible who are watching us.
Yeah, I'm certainly not very professional with any of this. I've never tried any like YouTube stuff or anything like that, or even really podcasting. But the one thing I found works for me is I just record Instagram stories on my phone as I'm doing the kind of the races or the rides or whatever, because I find that it doesn't take any brain power to think about it. So I can literally just flick on my camera and talk to it. And that's probably for me the most natural way. Because I think if you start recording loads of GoPro footage and you start trying to worry about editing, I can't do that when I'm on the bike. Like I'd have to think about the shots that you do. And I really respect people who do it. Like I was talking to Josh Ibbott recently about the shots he was doing for the GB Duro stuff, when he did was it the self-sufficient version, when they had to do the whole thing with their own supplies and in lockdown. And he recorded on GoPro during that, and also during like weather where he was verging on hypothermia, and it was horrific. And it's just, having the headspace and the self-control to think, actually, wait, I need to get something for my documentary that's going to be edited after I finish. I can't do that. That's just way too much for me. So I have a huge amount of respect for people who do that. But for me, it's just, turn on the phone, talk for under a minute, because I know Instagram stories, I can't talk for longer than a minute, and just get it done and upload.
Yeah, cool. Well, it comes across very well. So I think there's a lot to be said for the Instagram stories. And I've been dabbling with the GoPro, but I've had that. I don't have that much tenacity, because it's in the middle of the night and it's raining and I'm shattered, and I'm just like, I just can't. The camera stays well tucked away.
I think if you want to see Instagram stories well done, Sofyan Sahili's singing to camera when he's like in first or second place in a race is incredible.
Amazing.
That's amazing. If you haven't seen his Instagram stories, definitely check them out.
I'll have to go and have
really funny as well.
I have been known to do some tandem karaoke to keep Steve awake, so that's definitely got potential for Instagram stories. Fabulous. And then I will mention briefly as well, we're hoping to make use of your services in terms of Follow My Ride, which is
Follow My Challenge.
Follow My Challenge. I always say Follow My Ride. I don't know why.
That's fine.
Follow My Challenge. Because obviously, it involves more than just rides as well, which is I suppose a mapping site, isn't it, where you get and dot watching site where you get a tracker, you get a dot, and friends, family, followers can see wherever said person is. As Follow My Challenge, because it involves more than just cycle racing. So I wondered if there's been any particularly exciting events you've been able to watch through doing that. Has there been anything you've been kind of fixated by watching the dots on?
I'm wildly addicted to dot watching, especially when I've got close friends who race, and recently I had an entire weekend just wiped out because my best friend is Andrew Phillips, who just won 2VS. So he was doing Two Volcanos sprint, and I was trying to have a normal life away from it, and I just couldn't do anything for a whole weekend. So I am wildly addicted to dot watching, but I haven't really been following anything other than cycling on there. We've had a few requests for some stuff. Actually had some people inquire about a car rally recently. But you know, it's you can pretty much track anything. So, but it's generally people wanting to do running, walking, cycling. I think over in Europe they've done some stuff with yachts as well. We haven't done anything like that here, but yeah, it is generally people just wanting to head out and you know, have an adventure somewhere, or go for a race. So it's great fun being involved with the kind of people you meet. They're just like-minded, generally quite eccentric individuals, but it's really good fun.
Yeah, no, I kind of thought that might be the case, that yeah, you do get some pretty interesting stories come up, and yeah, it's pretty exciting to watch. So hopefully our challenge will be well watched as well. Just before we tie everything up, Rob, I've got a little bit of tandem trivia questions. I promise they're not too awful. You've actually answered the first one already, which would have been, have you ever ridden in tandem? But yeah, you've confirmed that. My next one would be, if you could ride a tandem with anybody at all, alive, dead, if you've even had fictional characters, who would you put on your tandem with you?
Oh, that's so difficult. I'm also like, I'm always assuming I'm on the front of the tandem as well, because I'm 6'5".
Well, it's up to you.
Yeah, but I feel like I would want them to do the steering, because I find it very unnerving that I'm now choosing someone who I deeply probably respect, and then I'm putting their life in my hands. So that's terrifying. Oh God, that's hard. I don't know. There's so many cliched answers I could give you about, you know, like Nelson Mandela and stuff like that. But Nelson Mandela would be terrible on the front of a tandem.
It's pretty small as well, isn't he?
Very difficult. You know what? I'd quite like it. Am I allowed to make the tandem a 3-person tandem?
Yeah, why not? Yeah, make it.
So I'd like to do it with the 2 guys I did my first ever tour on, so Andrew and Josh. So we were on our own bikes, and we had a lot of fun on our own bikes. I cannot imagine how much fun we would have had on a 3-man tandem. It would just been absolute bedlam. I think that would have been brilliant. So I don't know I don't know the order. I think I would have gone on the front, Andrew in the middle, and the Josh at the back in height order. So have like a descending tandem. Maybe, but that's no one famous, but that would be wonderful. I would have quite liked that.
Oh no, that's cool. That's an amazing idea. There's actually three Audaxers who many a year ago took a triplet, 3-person tandem on Paris Best Paris, which was Jim Hopper, Drew Buck, and I forget who the third person was. But they actually swapped seats as they went along, so they kind of rotated as they went round. And I think that those two themselves are quite infamous, shall we say, in the Audax world. So I think they had an absolute whale of time. I think Drew Buck turned up with a string of onions around his neck and all sorts. I think that is actually a pretty cool idea.
You have to get on well with the other people, don't you?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, probably even more so than just with 2 of you on the same bike. Amazing. So me and Steve say we're joined by the frame on the tandem. Is there anything on your rides that you're joined by the frame to, as in, is there anything that you can't do without, that you always take with you, that's either a bit of a creature comfort or essential bit of kit, or is there a bit of food that you always like to find on the road? What would you say your kind of top item is?
That's a very good question. And that's something that changes when you go from touring to ultra endurance, because you realize what you really can't do without, and it turns out you can do without pretty much everything, apart from a Wahoo, and that's it. I think that the thing that I struggle without, and I've realized, and also kind of miss most, is probably good coffee. And I know that sounds terrible, but you're smashing all these caffeine tablets and having cheap coffees, and all I want when I get off a ride is just have a nice coffee that I can enjoy, that I'm drinking for the flavor rather than just the amount of caffeine in it. So yeah, that's probably the one thing that if I ever have time, if I'm not racing, then I'll make sure I try and have a good coffee. I'll even take a stove if I'm camping out and just try and make something nice.
No, that's fair. And actually, one of the tandem ladies, that was one of their thing they couldn't do without, and they actually took a coffee maker with them around the world. But yeah, we're not big kind of coffee fiends, so I reckon that's where we'll get the edge on them, is by not taking the coffee maker.
Oh, you might need that coffee by the end, though.
There is that, actually, yeah, to be fair. Amazing. And then just one final question, why should we cycle around the world together on a tandem and break the world record?
Well, I mean, why? Because you want to, presumably, is the first reason. But I mean, it's the kind of thing that, and I'm going to relate this back to myself, because that's very self-centered to me, but also my point of reference. So my logic was that if I didn't do it, I might just get one chance to break a world record or to go for a world record. If you don't take that chance, then you never know. You don't know what might come up in the future. It's a big thing, and for you, it's even bigger. Like, I did a continent, that's 3 weeks basically. Like, yeah, you're doing a lot more than that. So if you've got the opportunity, I think the why is, well, you can, so do it. And I think seize it and enjoy it, because you're probably not going to do it twice. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I think once will be enough. Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much, Rob. It's been great to chat with you. Really appreciate all your tips and advice there. And yeah, hopefully you'll be following our challenge around the world too. Well, definitely, yeah.